From legendary filmmaker Ridley Scott, returning to the Alien franchise over 3 decades after the release of the original Alien, comes the 2012 science fiction horror prequel that promises to take audiences on a thrilling journey to explore the supposed origins of humanity in the far reaches of space. Acting as a semi-prequel to the Alien franchise itself, Prometheus delves into the mysteries of the space jockey, a giant extraterrestrial being first introduced in the original Alien film, as well as the earliest incarnations of not only the infamous facehugger, but what would eventually come to be known as xenomorphs as well. With a talented cast, stunning visuals, and a thought-provoking storyline, Prometheus is a film that challenges viewers to contemplate the nature of creation and the consequences of playing God. But does it live up to the quality of the original film it supposedly takes place before, or does it fall flat? Let's take a look at Prometheus. By 2002, plans were underway to develop a 5th Alien film in the Alien franchise, and director Ridley Scott contemplated revisiting the series he started with the original Alien. His aim was to delve into a prequel story that would explore the origins of the alien creatures themselves, as well as the extraterrestrial space jockey, briefly seen as the deceased pilot of the derelict spaceship in Alien. Sigourney Weaver also expressed her interest in returning to the franchise. Meanwhile, Aliens director James Cameron discussed the possibility of a sequel with Ridley Scott and began working with another writer on a story for the film. However, 20th Century Fox presented Cameron with a script for a crossover film featuring the xenomorphs facing off against the Predators, and this project ultimately resulted in the 2004 crossover film, which ultimately saw no involvement from Cameron whatsoever, because once Fox had confirmed their intent to pursue their crossover, Cameron abandoned his own project, feeling that the validity of the Alien franchise would be jeopardized by AVP. I mean, can you really blame him? At this point, the project went through several stages of development hell, but the project was very much dead in the water, at least for the next several years. By 2009, the project re-emerged as the prequel to the Alien story Scott had originally envisioned, with Scott himself attached to direct, and screenwriter John Spates was hired to write the script. After a few more snags, including Fox's desire to appeal to non-Alien fans as well as the existing fanbase, the studio hired Damien Lindelof to rework Spates' screenplay. Ridley Scott requested a $250 million budget for the film to truly see his vision properly translated to the big screen, and strongly championed for the film to be an adult-oriented project rather than something that would appeal to teenagers. But Fox was hesitant to invest that amount of money with those concepts in mind, wanting to ensure that the film would appeal to a wider audience and hence potentially bring in more revenue. The film initially had the working title Paradise, in reference to John Milton's poem Paradise Lost, but director Ridley Scott felt that this would give away too much about the movie. The CEO of Fox, Thomas Rothman, proposed the title Prometheus, which was officially adopted as the film's official title in January of 2011. After settling on the new title, the production team began deliberately distancing the film from its connection to the Alien franchise as a whole, creating a renewed sense of anticipation among audiences and a slight sense of unease and worry among longtime franchise fans. While acknowledging that Alien served as the inspiration for the project, Scott emphasized that Prometheus had its own unique mythology and universe. However, in June 2011, Scott and co-writer Damien Lindelof walked back these sentiments and officially confirmed that the events of Prometheus did in fact take place in the same universe as the Alien series, with Ridley quoted as stating, "By the end of the 3rd act, the audience begins to see the DNA of the original Alien film, but not the subsequent sequels." End quote. Principal photography for the film was conducted between March 21st and October 8th of 2011, with filming occurring at Shepperton Studios and Pinewood Studios in England. Despite limited studio space, the crew managed to make 5 stages work for roughly 16 sets, and expanded the 007 stage by over 30%. Ridley Scott avoided using green screens whenever possible, and instead used practical sets with CGI elements added in post-production. The cast of Prometheus includes Noomi Rapace as Elizabeth Shaw, an archaeologist and our main protagonist, Michael Fassbender as David, an android designed to be indistinguishable from humans, who develops his own ego and insecurities, Charlize Theron as Meredith Vickers, a Wayland Corporation employee sent to monitor the expedition, Idris Elba as Janik, the captain of the Prometheus ship, who is described as a longshoreman and sailor with a military background, Guy Pearce as Peter Wayland, the billionaire founder and CEO of Wayland Corp., who suffers from a god complex, and Logan Marshall-Green as Charlie Holloway, an archaeologist and Shaw's love interest who is described as a skeptic and an atheist. While Scott had filmed Prometheus with both R and PG-13 ratings in mind, he acknowledged that financially, an R rating made more sense and that the film's ideas were inherently stressful. The film ultimately received an R rating, with the scene of Shaw removing her alien offspring being the significant cause of the rating. A fight scene between Shaw and the engineer was also shortened to maintain the latter's importance. Mark Streitenfeld, who had collaborated with Scott on previous ventures, created the musical score for Prometheus. The recording process involved a 90-piece orchestra at Abbey Road Studios in London, England, and lasted just over a week. Before filming began, Streitenfeld started conceptualizing ideas for the score after reading the script. To produce the score's unique and unsettling sound, he employed unconventional techniques such as writing the sheet music in reverse and then digitally flipping it. Although, like some of the previous Alien films, I'm not a huge fan of this score, but it is night and day difference compared to the AVP scores, and is probably the 5th best score in the franchise following Alien Resurrection. The alien creatures in the film were developed by Neil Scanlan and Connor O'Sullivan, with the intention of portraying each creature as having a clear biological function and purpose. They drew inspiration from natural life, such as plants and sea creatures, which also influenced Ridley Scott's vision for creature design. Carlos Huanta, another creature designer, made the creature designs pale to create a contrast with the dark, H.R. Giger-inspired aesthetic of the original Alien. Huanta referenced a variety of sources, including Scott's designs for the pale-skinned engineers, as well as other Giger works, national monuments, sculptures, and statues. The engineers were created using full-body prosthetics applied to the actors, whose facial features were reduced by the material, then digitally enhanced to create a godlike physical perfection. Scott referred to the engineers as Dark Angels, who were tall and elegant in appearance. The Deacon, the film's last unveiled creature and the one most akin to a xenomorph, was named for its long, pointed head resembling a bishop's mitre. The creature's genetic lineage, starting with the trilobite, the film's equivalent of a proto-facehugger, begins with the trilobite impregnating the engineer, and the protruding jaw from the Deacon's mouth was inspired by that of the goblin shark. According to franchise mythology, at least, according to Prometheus's version of said mythology, the Deacon would be the earliest incarnation of what would eventually become the xenomorphs down the road. However, this again depends on what mythology we are taking as canon or not, because the story of this film in and of itself renders much of that mythology very problematic, not unlike the questions and issues that arose with the 2004 AVP film. In the months leading up to the first trailer, I was more than apprehensive considering this was going to be a prequel that took place before the events of the original Alien, a space of time I didn't ever want to be explored. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't exceedingly curious about what the film would be and how the story would play out. After the trailer finally dropped, and we saw those fantastical shots about them searching for the answer to man's own creation, I'm paraphrasing here obviously, as well as the obligatory shots of horror that naturally illustrates the way things will inevitably go south during the film, this is a horror movie after all, I knew we were at least in for an entertaining time. But when that trailer fed us those breadcrumbs of the derelict spaceship, or at least what we thought was the same derelict spaceship from the '79 movie, as well as the space jockey himself being locked into his chair, or again, who at least we thought was the space jockey from the '79 film, I was immediately hooked from that point on. They had me. I was all aboard the hype train to Prometheus. But did the film end up being as good and fruitful as the trailer would have us believe? Prometheus tells the story of a skilled archaeologist named Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, who, along with her partner Charlie Holloway, lead a team of people on a challenging scientific mission into the far reaches of outer space to investigate the existence of an advanced alien species called the Engineers. Their expedition takes them to LV-223, a desolate moon. Not the same moon from the original Alien, for some dumbass reason, where they explore a strange and organic complex comprised of dark chambers and underground tunnels. However, their discoveries inside this mysterious location are more shocking than they could ever have imagined, and as a result, their findings put not only the success of the mission in danger, but also the fate of humanity, raising fundamental questions about the existence of human beings that may have far-reaching implications for the future. Once I left the theater that fateful opening night, I was less than enthusiastic about the film I had just watched. I mean, in isolation, I guess it could be considered a decently passable science fiction horror romp, but that's the problem. No matter how you slice it, this was not a standalone venture that stood on its own. This was a prequel to the best space horror franchise of all time, and with that said, Prometheus really feels like it misses the mark. If we knew that Prometheus was the first of like 5 movies or something leading up to the beginning of the 1979 film, and we knew that there was a ton of stuff purposely left open-ended that were guaranteed to be tied up properly before the end of this overall prequel era, then Prometheus would probably be okay. But we didn't really have any of those guarantees. We just knew it was a prequel. My problems aren't even due to the film not featuring the xenomorph or facehuggers or anything really palpable from the mainline franchise. We sort of knew that the film would not have that stuff going in, but it really comes down to frustration over the story choices and the location choices that would have made the film tie neatly and perfectly right into the '79 film, but for whatever reason, the filmmakers chose not to do that. A few examples of what I'm talking about are things such as the planet being LV-233 and not LV-426, the engineer being impregnated by a proto-facehugger type creature, but not being the same engineer who we see dead in the derelict ship from the '79 film, and the engineer spacecraft in this movie crashing onto the planet's surface in the same way the one from the '79 film did, but not being the same ship. You see what I mean? It's like they were going to tie this directly to Alien, but then got cold feet. So now we have this planet that's right next door to the planet from the first film, with a dead engineer and a crashed engineer ship on it, while LV-426 also has its own crashed engineer ship and a dead engineer as well. I mean, what the actual hell kind of coincidence is that? Alas, on its own, Prometheus is a decent enough sci-fi horror movie that's at least worth checking out. But as an Alien prequel, albeit a very distant prequel, it falls completely flat, and doesn't feel like it even belongs in the franchise. The cinematography, lighting, sound design were all great, the editing and the pace and the production design were on point, the acting was good, the score fit the movie decently well, but the story itself and the fact that we know this supposedly takes place before the gritty and rugged universe established in Alien, Prometheus feels a bit too polished and sterile when compared to the grittier stylings of the mainline franchise. But I suppose this could be due to the fact that this story takes place nearly 100 years before the events of Alien itself, if I'm not mistaken. I was hoping that the film's 2017 sequel, Covenant, would remedy some of my issues with the first film, and by doing so, would make Prometheus stand as a better entry in and of itself. But let's just say that didn't happen. But Covenant is a discussion for another review video. With all of this said, Ridley Scott's Prometheus, if not just once, is worth the watch.